Welcome to today's session. In today's webinar session, we are going to see about subflows in Zoho Flow. So this is going to be an introduction about the newly released feature in Zoho Flow, which is called subflows. Before going into the session, here are a few general announcements. Everyone will be on mute by default, and if you have any questions, there is a Q&A tab using which you can raise your questions. And in between, we'll be conducting some polls, so please do participate in it. And everyone will be receiving a recording of this session. So yeah. Oh, there is a poll coming your way. Please do participate, and then we can start the session. So in today's session, we are going to see about what is a subflow and what are all the components involved in this subflow and a small use case involving this subflow. And at the end of the session, we'll have a Q&A session where in that time you can ask your questions. In between also, you can raise your questions using the questions tab. We have one more poll coming up your way. Please do participate in that also. So subflow, what is a subflow? So subflow is an individual flow using which you can configure a set of actions and logics which are repetitive across your flows. So you are building some integration, and in those integrations, you are repeating a same set of actions or logic means, then in that case, this subflow can help you. What subflow can do is it can handle the actions and logics in a separate flow, and it can process the data and perform actions based on it. So this can help you regularize your automations by uh, reducing the number of repetitive actions you are going to build in your integrations. So that's where Subflow helps you. So Subflow works on this concept. So we'll have a parent flow and we'll have a child flow. The child flow will be called as the subflow, in which we'll be performing the actions. So Subflow will get the data from the parent flow and it will perform the actions and logics which are configured in it. And if needed, the subflow can also return data to the parent flow, using which the parent flow can process further. So that's how the subflow works. It depends upon a parent flow from where it will receive data and the actions are performed. Components involved in a subflow. So basically the subflow will have a trigger, which is called the subflow trigger. In that trigger only, we'll be getting the data and we'll be processing it further. And actions in the subflow. So like the normal Zoho Flow integrations you build, you can make use of all the actions which are available in Zoho Flow. And even the custom functions which are available in Zoho Flow can be used inside a subflow. And return data, as I told, if the parent flow requires any data from the subflow can return the data to the parent flow also. So these are the components involved in a subflow. So a subflow trigger consists of these two things. One is the input parameters and the other one is the output parameters. Input parameters are nothing but the data or fields which are required by the subflow to execute its actions. So whatever actions which you are configuring in the subflow, so what are all the data which are required by those actions has to be configured in the input, so that we'll be getting the data. And output are the parameters which are required by the parent flow from the subflow. So input parameters will get data from the parent flow, and the output parameters will be used to send data to the parent flow. So that's about the trigger. And then if you have built Zoho Flow integrations previously, then this is the first page which will come after you create a new flow. So in this page, you will be selecting the type of trigger you are going to use in Flow. So these are the different types of triggers we have in Flow, and the Subflow is the recently added trigger in Zoho Flow. So if you are new to Zoho Flow, we have some webinars recorded where you can find out about all these other triggers. So this is where you need to choose the subflow trigger. And in the next step, you need to configure the input and output which are required. So input, as I told, the fields which are required for the subflow to execute its action. and the output are the fields which are required by the parent flow. So this will be the configuration of the subflow trigger. So you'll need to configure an input parameters and output parameters. Actions are normal, like how do you use the normal Zoho Flow integration? So what are all the application actions which are available in Zoho Flow? Those can be used in the Subflow, and even the commands and scripts option which we have, and the deluge custom functions, everything can be used in Subflow. So there is no limitation in that part. And then return data, it is used to send data back to the parent flow. And this is how the return data configuration will look like in the flow page. So here, what are all the fields we have configured in the output will be listed here in the return data thing. So here you need to pass the values so that these values can be received in the parent flow. Here is a pictorial representation of how a subflow is being used. So the parent flow is where the form submitted trigger happens, and it has a couple of actions. One is to create a lead, and another one is to create a task. And to the create lead, the subflow is connected, and the subflow is taking care of the notification related actions. So it is sending an email and sending a message, and those notification related actions are being handled in the subflow, and the lead creation or task creation is being handled in the parent flow. Okay. Now we'll see an use case involving subflows. So I have a subflow here. So this is the subflow trigger. Once you create a flow in Zoho Flow, you need to choose the type of trigger you want. So type of trigger is subflow trigger. And then the next step is to choose the input parameters. So in this use case, consider you are having multiple forms hosted in your website. And if somebody comes and fills the form and submits, means you want to create them as a lead in your Zoho CRM. So since you have multiple forms, you need to configure multiple flows for each form to create the leads individually. So now using Subflow, we are going to see how to avoid that multiple flow creations. So I'm going to create lead in CRM. So to create lead in Zoho CRM, the mandatory fields are name and email. So in the input, I'm getting the name and email, because whatever fields we are going to give in the input, only those values will be received in the subflow. So to create a lead, name and email is enough. Those are the mandatory fields. So that's enough for me. And I'm using that in the input. I'll come back to the output later. Now I'm getting the name and email from the parent flow to the subflow. Now using that name and email, I'll have this email and name field for mapping. So I'm going to use a fetch lead action to see if this lead is already existing in my CRM or not. Suppose if that lead is already existing in my CRM, means I just want to update them instead of creating a duplicate lead. So I'm using this fetch module entry based on the email I'm getting from the subflow trigger. So based on this email, it will search if there is any lead in my CRM or not. And I'm using a decision to check if the lead ID is null or not. If the lead ID is null, means the email which is passed into the fetch action was not already there in Zoho CRM. So to that condition, I'm creating the lead. So create module entry is being used. I have used the name and email field, which I'm getting as input from the subflow over here. So last name, I have mapped the name field, and the email field, I have mapped the email. So this is enough to create the lead. And then if the lead ID is not null, it is an existing lead in CRM. So I'm using update lead action, which is update module entry, and I've selected the leads module. So now this is the subflow, and in this subflow, we need to pass the name and email. So the name and email should be passed from the parent flow. Unlike other Zoho Flow triggers, like in Zoho Flow app triggers or webhook triggers, whatever trigger you use, based on the events happening in that application, will be getting data by default into the Zoho Flows trigger. But this subflow can't be triggered manually or via some other automation. The only way we can send data to the subflow trigger is via a parent flow. So now we need to configure the parent flow. Now the lead creation part is being handled in the subflow. Now we need a parent flow which sends data to this subflow. So as I told, a form submission is going to be the trigger in my case. So one of my forms or form I'm selecting for this case. Entry submitted trigger triggers whenever a new entry is made in the selected form. And I'll use the integration form. So these are the forms I have, and this is the integration form which I have. So I have configured the trigger. Now, one of the Zoho form I have selected it in the trigger, and whenever somebody makes a submission in that form, it is going to trigger this particular trigger. Now, from this trigger, I need to call my subflow, which is here. This will process the further actions. So under logic, you will find the call a subflow action. So logic, flow control, call a subflow. So drag and drop the call a subflow. In that, you have to choose the subflow we have. So the name of the subflow I created is CRM. So choose the subflow. And then whatever fields you have provided in the input here, so these are mandatory for the subflow to proceed. So the input fields which are configured in the subflow will be listed here for mapping, and we need to pass data from here to the subflow. Now this is my form trigger. From that, I'm passing the first name space last name to the subflow input field, which is the name field in subflow trigger. And then for the email field, I'm sending the email which is being submitted in my integration form. So this is the integration form. So the fields which I have are listed here, and I'm using the first name and last name and email field to send it to the subflow trigger. Now click done. The call subflow is used. Turn on the flow. So now once the flow is turned on, whenever a submission is made in this form, it will trigger this flow, and this flow will call the subflow, and the subflow will be processed. Now let's quickly do an execution. Test. Submit. My flow would have triggered. Okay, it says completed. Now here you see the submission I made has triggered this flow. Email, name, and whatever we submitted are received in this flow. And to the subflow, we can see that the first name and last name is being pushed to the name field, and the email which I submitted is being pushed to the email field in the subflow trigger. And the subflow which is called is the CRM subflow, which we have here. From here itself, you can see the subflow actions which are performed. So here to the subflow, the input which are passed are the name and email. And based on the email pass, the fetch model entry has performed its action and no lead was found. So based on the decision, it has created a new lead. So we can view the subflow actions also from here, and also individually, if you want to view, we can check it out from here. So whenever the form submission is made, it triggered my flow and it called the subflow. Now, if I want to set up the same kind of automation for my other form means, all we need to do is just create a new flow, name it. Now, this is where you need to select the subflow trigger, but I'm going to use the Zoho form. I'm going to use one of my other form for the integration. So app trigger, Zoho forms, entry submitter, choose a connection. And in that form, I'll use the flow test form. And this is my flow test form, and it has a different set of fields. Now, all we need to do is just connect the call a subflow action, choose the subflow which needs to be triggered, and name and email. If the field differs from form to form, then we need to remap the fields. If the fields are same, then no need to remap. You can just directly map it. Now, for all the other forms, you can just set up the trigger and make use of the call a subflow action. This can be useful not only having multiple forms hosted in your website. You can collect leads from multiple sources. Like if you are getting leads via Google Sheets, you can have Google Sheets as the trigger. And to that Google Sheets, you can call a subflow. And all the subflow needs is just the name and email to create leads. So similarly, for whatever actions you want to perform in the subflow, we have to just make sure the parent flow is providing those as the input to the subflow trigger. Now, this use case ends with either creating a lead in CRM or updating a lead in CRM. But if in case, if the parent flow requires any additional data to be performed for the further actions, then we need to configure the return data action. So now we need the out configuration. So to the output, we need to configure what are all the fields which are required by my parent flow. So in this parent flow, if I want to post a click message, so I'm going to message in a channel after the lead is being created over there. So just choose a So if the parent flow wants to perform a further action, there is actually two kind of options over here. So first, we need to configure what are all the output fields which needs to be configured. So what are all the data the parent flow requires from the subflow. So for example, if email and name, it will be already available there. Now after the lead creation, if we want the lead ID or some other data for the parent flow, means we can send it from the subflow. For example, after the lead is created, the lead owner and lead ID will be generated. So those data can be pushed to the parent flow, and with that data, parent flow can configure the further actions, or you can configure it in the subflow also. Like we can configure it however we want. So now the output fields are configured, and then we need to use the return data to send the data to the parent flow. Now return data, whatever fields which we added in the output configuration is being shown here. So in the output, we have 4 fields. Now if we add one more field, that field will be listed here, so that we have to make sure those field values are sent from this flow. So email, name, lead ID will be generated after creation or updation of the lead. So lead ID, owner detail, we are additionally passing the owner detail, phone number also we are sending. So similarly for this action also, I'm going to return the data to the parent flow. So same return data and configure the lead ID will be from the create lead action. Owner is also from the create lead owner. Now, whatever fields we have configured in the output can be pushed to the parent flow. Now, in the parent flow, in this call a subflow action, we have two options available. One is wait and continue, and another one is continue without waiting. So if we are going to continue without waiting option means this parent flow will call the subflow and it will immediately perform the next action. So now we are continue without waiting. So no fields from the subform is being returned here. We can only use the fields which we are having in the trigger. For example, if you are going to post a message, we have received a new lead. Name, email. So I can use this data for mapping, and this action doesn't require any data from the subflow. So we can go ahead with the continue without waiting option. If in case this parent flow's further action requires any data from the subflow, then we have to use this wait and continue option. So even if there is any delays you have used in the subflow, means if you have used 1 hour, 2 hour, 1 day delays, only after those delays are performed and at the end, only after this return data action is executed, this flow will start the next action which is connected to the call a subflow action. So call a subflow, wait and continue. In the message in channel action, you can see that the fields which are sent from the subflow can be used here for the further actions. So now you can additionally configure the fields which are being returned from the owner is being written. So I can additionally add the owner details, CRM lead ID. So now after the flow is triggered, it will call the subflow, and the subflow will create or update the lead. And once it is done, it will return the data to the actual main flow. And once the data is received, then it will perform the actions which are connected below it. So that's how it works, the subflow and the parent flow. Without the parent flow, subflow will not trigger, because the only source of data which is sent to the subflow is via the parent flow. And the return data is optional. If the parent flow requires any data from the subflow, you can configure the return data and you can make use of it. If it doesn't require anything from the Subflow, then you can go ahead with this continue without waiting option. So yeah, you can configure a lot of integrations with the help of Subflow. So you can configure logics alone in the Subflow and perform actions in the parent flow. Like that, you can mix and match the parent flow and Subflow and make use of it. And also per flow, the number of actions you can use is around 140. So if you are using a Subflow means, then you can use additional actions also. Half the actions can be configured in the Subflow and half the actions can be configured in the parent flow. Like that, you can make use of it. Here are a few other examples which we have based on the parent flow and the subflow. So here is a parent flow which triggers when a ticket is created in Zoho Desk, and it calls a subflow. In that subflow, these are the input fields which are being requested by that subflow, and the input fields are mapped here. Now, in the subflow, based on the inputs which are received, a decision is being used to check if the SLA level, if it matches, delay it for a time, and then fetch the ticket to check its status again and post the status of the ticket in the message channel with additional information. If it doesn't require, go to the other next logic. Similarly, everything is being handled here. For each SLA, we have configured a separate condition over here. And if you are adding further logics into your flow, you can configure it in the subflow without touching the parent flow. So yeah, that's about subflows. So why use a subflow? As you have seen, if you are using a common set of actions or logic across multiple flow of yours means, then you can make use of the subflow to avoid doing the same integrations again and again. So you can have 10 parent flows and all the 10 parent flows can be connected to a single subflow, or within a single parent flow itself, you can call multiple subflows. Like however you can configure it. Then the limitations while using a subflow, there is no limitations in using the actions in flow. The only limitation is it it requires a parent flow. It can't run on its own. Only if there is a parent flow, the subflow will work, because from the parent flow only it is receiving data. So if you try to switch off a subflow means it will not turn off unless it is not being used in a parent flow. If it is being in a parent flow, then you can't switch off a subflow. Similarly, a parent flow can't be switched off if a subflow which is being used in it is still live. So these, you can scan this QR code to check out our recorded webinars. It will redirect you to our Zoho Flow webinar page. So yeah, check out the QR code which is being displayed right now. Okay, thanks everyone for attending this session, and